And you are live.
Good evening, and welcome to a virtual meeting of the City of Dublin Architectural Review Board. The Ohio Legislature passed several emergency laws to address the pandemic, including the ability for public entities to have virtual meetings. We appreciate this ability to maintain our continuity of government. For the present time, we are holding our meetings online and live streaming those meetings on YouTube. You can access the live stream on the city's website. Tonight, there are 4 members of the board present. Our chair is absent tonight, but I'm sure she'll be with us in our next meeting. The procedure for each case has potentially 5 steps. The staff will present the case. The applicant will then have an opportunity to make a presentation. The board will then ask clarifying questions of either the staff or the applicant. We will then read public comments that have been submitted. And finally, the board will then deliberate on a particular case. In order to submit any questions or comments during the meeting, please use the form under the streaming video on the city's website. These questions and comments will be relayed to the board by the meeting moderator. We want to accommodate public participation to the greatest extent possible and welcome your comments on cases. Please use valid name and address when submitting your comments and refrain from making any inappropriate comments. This is not a perfect system, but in these difficult times, we appreciate your patience. We typically start our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I would ask that everyone would stand for the pledge and the flag would be displayed. Perhaps is the flag going to be displayed?
Sorry, give me 1 second here. I'm having technical difficulties.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, can we have the roll call, please?
Mr. Kanaki,
Here.
can you hear me?
Yeah, it just took me a minute to get the mic on.
Okay. Ms. Cram,
Here.
Mr. Cotter,
Here.
Mr. Alexander.
Here. Can I have a motion to accept the documents into record and approve the July, and I believe there's a typo, or I think Jenny mentioned earlier it should be the 22nd
That's correct.
meeting minutes? Okay.
I'll motion to accept the minutes.
Second.
Mr. Cotter,
Yes.
Ms. Cram,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes,
Mr. Kanaki.
Yes.
thank you. The Architectural Review Board is responsible for review and construction and modifications or alterations to any site in the review district or area subject to the architectural review under the provision of Zoning Code Section 153.177. The board has a decision-making responsibility on these cases. A swearing in of anyone who intends to address the board on any of these cases is necessary. So anyone who's listening who intends to address the board on cases, please stand and raise your right hand and answer in the affirmative. Do you swear to affirm, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony to the board?
I do.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll proceed to our cases for this evening. The first case is an informal review for the historic Dublin stone walls. The application is a request for feedback on the installation of the stone walls along South High Street from Bridge Street to John Wright Lane. The area is zoned Bridge Street District, Historic Core, and Historic South. Mr. Ridge will be our presenter, and so Chase, we'll turn it over to you.
All right, good evening, thank you. As was mentioned, this is a request for informal review and non-binding feedback for the installation of stone walls along the corridor of South High Street from Bridge Street to John Wright Lane. The site is highlighted in yellow here. You can see it contains city right-of-way from Bridge Street to the north, all the way down to John Wright Lane to the south. These photos show some of the existing conditions on the east side of South High Street. So you notice the brick sidewalk, characteristic of the historic district, the tree lawn, and the primarily matured trees along the east side of South High Street. These photos show the existing conditions of the west side of South High Street. So once again, you'll notice the brick sidewalks. You'll notice a significant change in grade on this side of the street. You'll also notice here in the left and center photo, the carriage steps. And then you'll also notice the lack of street trees here, as this side of High Street had the street trees removed. So this is the proposed site plan. You'll see Bridge Street is actually on the left side of your screen there, and then John Wright Lane will be on the right side. There are a number of new trees, which are indicated by the green circles on the site. So the tree species and locations have actually already been determined. Next, you'll notice the location of the stone walls, the proposed stone walls, which are highlighted in red. These are only shown on the west side of South High Street because they are part of phase one. So I'll talk about phasing a bit more just shortly. There are a number of historic relics along the corridor, which will be preserved. So these include the carriage steps, as well as a hitching post in an obelisk style. These photos show some of the proposed elevations. So on the left, you have kind of what that would look like along South High Street. And then on the right is a closer up detail of the stone wall. As part of phase one, the stone retaining walls will be installed on the west side of South High Street. So these will be a maximum of 30 inches in height. And they're essentially constructed to establish a consistent grade for the trees, which will be planted along South High Street. Phase two includes the installation of stone seat walls and decorative columns. So you can see that on the right there. The decorative columns will be topped with a bookend, a stone bookend. So these are to be, in phase two, these are to be installed in addition to the stone retaining walls, in locations still to be determined and at a future date. So both these seat walls and the retaining walls are to be constructed of a natural stone veneer with a racked mortared joint. So these mimic the dry laid stone walls seen elsewhere in the city. An example of this is at the Ground of Remembrance. So the stone walls there actually are going to be exactly the same as they are here, construction-wise. So in terms of tonight, we are asking for informal review and feedback. So our only recommendation tonight is that the ARB provide feedback on the stone walls proposed for South High Street. I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have. And then we also have Sean Krowitsky here from Parks and Rec. Thank you.
Does Sean want to add anything to that presentation?
Yeah, sure. If Chase, can you go back to the plan a minute? With the red squares.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So I just want to point out with phasing, because I know there's some questions that came up about phasing. I think we had a public comment to this point. Phasing for this project, we are only looking at doing what's been kind of outlined here in the red squares for the initial phase. Future phases, which we're doing a full design for, won't come online until the trees on the east side begin to actually decline. We had an arborist do a review of them, and they're in decline now. We're waiting to see how long that's going to take. I mean, it could take 5, it could be 10 years. So there's a long time before the other side will come into play. The retaining walls we're talking about, and then we discussed, are, as Chase had mentioned, along these black lines. In those future phases, at some time, other walls will be constructed once we figure out where they need to go along the streetscape. And again, they're intended to be seat walls for parades or that you can sit along them. The current phase, they're actually needed to retain the sidewalk, because the sidewalk, as you saw in the pictures, and Chase, if you want to back up to the west pictures. Yeah, you see how the sidewalk is actually sitting high above the curb. So we're actually going to take where the grass is and chop it out so that the ground level comes down to the curb level. And we need a retaining wall to hold up that sidewalk. The wall on the sidewalk side will perch just slightly above to provide an edge, so somebody with a wheelchair or somebody who's pushing a stroller that can't go over the edge. There'll be a block there, but it's only going to be like a stone course or two high, but it's keeping that 30-inch height maximum, so we have no handrail or any issues there. But will also be accessible from people like parades in the future. They can stand next to the trees and sit on the wall or lean on the wall. So I just wanted to make sure there was understanding in how those walls are constructed and why, and then also to address the engineering department is actually currently working on a project to remove the power lines along South High Street, and that will come actually after we plant the trees, but before the trees get to any kind of size that they'll be impacted by those lines. Because it'll take 3 to 5 years before they really do much of growing, because they got to get established, and then they'll start to move, and then they'll start to grow, and by then the power lines will have been moved. So I know there's some concern about that as well. So I wanted to point that out. So I guess that's all I had really to add. Well, no, let me ask one more thing. You see the brick stairs here. We are going to add a few penetration points along the street so that people don't have to walk all the way down around the walls. And we're going to mimic this same brick detail and just have penetrations here and there. So again, it's just easier access to the sidewalk. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
Okay. Board members, do you have any questions for either Chase or Sean?
Maybe just a couple, just from a look at the thing. So I see that you're going to keep, because there's still a lot of the power line. There's a lot of poles in that area. So you don't see any issue as you lower the grade, whatever it is, 2 feet or 3 feet, with the poles extended more. So AP doesn't have an issue with that as one. And are they going to interfere with where the trees are supposed to go?
So we will probably have to work around those poles initially. So we may have breaks in the wall where those poles are, and we may delay planting that particular tree. And I think there's only 3 locations at max where we may have that interference issue. And then we'll just come back and fix that after the fact. We'll patch the wall, dig the rest of that dirt out, and plant the tree in the future.
Okay. And the
We
other one
haven't
for me
had
is
the conversation, sorry, we haven't had the conversations with AEP yet on how much we can excavate. But if that becomes the issue, that's how we plan to handle it.
okay. I'll come back because just a question about the pools, but and also the streetlights, because they are well, the ones that at least the two I looked at, they're on above grade. So you're going to cut them down to grade and leave them, or add a new pedestal.
We will have to pour a new foundation and lower them.
Okay, so they'll end up in their final spot during this transition.
They'll stay where they're at today, and we're just going to lower them down.
Lower them down. Okay.
Amy or Frank, do you have any questions?
Sure, just one. The walls are going to be completely in the right of way, so the sidewalk will be, or the wall will be divided between the sidewalk and the street, basically. Is that
Correct.
right? That's what I figured. Is there enough room in some of those spots? I haven't walked the entire thing, but it seems sort of tight in some of the areas, like near the pub or Dublinville. Sorry.
I think we're averaging between 4 and 5 feet of verge for the trees, the tree area. So it's a little deceiving because of the slope. It makes it look a little less. And there's some deviation with the sidewalk with little curb or little inconsistencies. It's not real straight. So when we build these walls, obviously we're going to have to deconstruct some of the sidewalk, build the block wall behind and on that edge, and then refit that sidewalk back in. So some of those inconsistencies will get straightened up. We won't be reducing the sidewalk width, but we'll get rid of some of the weird little inconsistencies. And there's some areas where we'll do some infill of sand infill on the brick pavers because they've lost some of that. So there'll be some repair work as well.
I actually did have one question. So on the east side, there's really no slope difference. So those aren't retaining walls on the east side.
Correct. So in the future, when we do the additional walls, those will purely be on grade. So those will be a natural stand or a natural stack look wall like we do everywhere else, with a historic Dublin stone look. And those would still be a seat wall, but they're not going to be retaining any soil.
And then on the west side, not the whole west side isn't sloped. There's only certain sections. So is it serving as that retaining wall only on those sections?
So in phase 1, we are only worrying about getting the retaining sections in, which actually is most of that block, because it goes from the tavern all the way down to almost the end of John Wright's. There's only a small section at the end where it doesn't actually slope. So most of that length is in retaining condition, various heights, but it's retaining.
Well, that was my next question then. The height is because you said that the retaining wall would only be a course or two above the sidewalk height. Is that for the entire? Are you going to make that consistent the entire length?
Correct.
The entire west side, it would only be a course or two. It's going to be abutting the street curb, and then the height.
Not abutting the street curb. It'll be back behind the street curb, but it'll be vertical to the sidewalk.
Vertical to the sidewalk, and then only a course or two taller than the sidewalk.
Yeah. So it'll actually the walls will gradually come down as the sidewalks come down in elevation.
So the wall itself will be shorter, but the level to the sidewalk will be the same the entire length.
Yes, that's the plan.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get at. Like, it's not going to go up and down along the sidewalk height.
No, that top course should kind of follow the sidewalk. Well, there may be some sections where it's 2 and some sections where it's 1 to make up as it's coming down in the wall, so we don't. But we're going to try to minimize that step, so to speak. But we're not going to have it sticking way up, no.
Okay, because on the other section, on the east side, you're going to have a wall that sticks 2 feet up over the sidewalk.
Yeah, it'll be a completely standing wall at the time that happens in the future.
Okay, all right, that answers my question.
I know on the east side, that's the next phase out, but I know there's some bike racks on that part of the sidewalk area and the right of way. Will those be moved somewhere else or just eliminated altogether?
We'll probably work around them. I mean, the idea is to add these as just additional aesthetics along the street to kind of tie in the stuff that we have to do with these retaining walls. There's been a push for a while now to add more of the historic walls in historic Dublin. So this is all kind of tied together with that. But we're not looking to remove anything. We may, if it makes sense, move them a little further down, but we're not going to take away any amenities. Same thing with the trash cans. We got to figure out where those sit in elevation and stuff.
Okay. And Sean, just maybe one more, just it comes a bit from the public comment. Because if you look at the power lines up there, I mean, there's a lot of power lines up there and they cross the street, right? So the west side power lines have feed that goes to east side buildings. So just trying to understand then, I mean, you haven't been in contact with AEP, and I think the public comment is valid about how you're going to get, where you're going to put those power lines. How do you make sure you don't tear up whatever? If you have to drill under the street, come back up through the east side sidewalk, or again, conversely, go to the west side buildings. I mean, how are you going to reconcile just to make sure we don't put 1.6 million in and then we tear part of it up, which I think that public comment is a good one, huh?
So we have not contacted AEP. Engineering has.
Okay.
They're the ones dealing with the power lines. And what my understanding is, and it's not my project, so I can't give you all the ins and outs of the power line side of this, but the idea is they're going to move them from the street frontage back to the alleys, and everything will be fed from the alleys on both sides. So,
okay.
And that's part of the reason why it's taking as long as it is, because there's phasing that has to happen where AEP provides some poles and some service in the rear before they can take the actual street poles out.
Okay.
So even the houses that are fed across the street, they'll get fed from the alley on the other side. So the east side, that'll get fed from that alley, and the west will get fed from the west alley.
Okay. So AEP will start over. I mean, they'll put full service in before you take the stuff, whatever you're going to do on either side before you take all that out. And you've already pre-planned roughly if you have to fix the wall or do something with the pole, you'll just plant the new tree or fix the pole in 2 years or 3 years, whenever that is.
Yep.
Okay.
I have a couple questions. One of them, the height of the wall, you mentioned 30-inch maximum. Are you anticipating people will sit on the side facing the street? Because typically a seat is 16 to 18 inches. So, I wasn't quite sure when I read that, because I know you have a significant grade change between the street side and the west side of grade. So whether it's 2.6 max off the street side.
So the idea there is there are some areas where it's going to need to be 30 inches, but it's not the whole length. The reason the 30-inch max was done so we didn't have handrails and stuff junking up the streetscape. That's why the 30-inch max is there. We're going to try to keep it where we can in that 18 to 24 kind of, or 20-inch range. Some of it may not be comfortably sat on. You may lean on it. But the idea that you could technically hop up on it and sit on it. It's not a chair height type seat.
Are you going to, it appears the goal is to level the grade from curb to wall on both sides. So then is the goal to have the appearance that the wall from the street is the same height on both sides?
Correct.
Okay.
And there might be a little bit of difference, like we said, because the other side where we've got freestanding walls, obviously we want those to act as a seat wall where we can. When we're retaining, we have to deal with whatever the height the sidewalk is. But everywhere else where we have that full carte blanche to make whatever size we want it to be at a seat wall height. But the aesthetic will carry throughout the corridor.
And it's far enough back, it'll clear car doors?
Yeah.
Open.
That was another point why we didn't push the walls to the edge of the curb and then fill that whole back area, was because we wanted the car doors to be able to open, have that availability for people to stand for the parade and lean against the wall. But the other piece is, and we didn't talk about this, it's another part of this. I think it was in the staff report though. We're actually putting Silvacells or Stratovault, whichever system we end up using, under the pavement. So it's a suspended pavement system that will basically allow us to fill under the actual roadway or the parking spaces for most of it, because there's only a small area to the very north when we eventually replace the trees by Jenny's that would be in the drive aisle. But what it does is it basically gives us an area we can put in good soil for the trees under the ground, under the road, that the trees can take advantage of. Because what we found through studies and stuff with our city forester, and there's a lot of papers written on it, a shade tree needs about 1,000 cubic feet of soil to grow it. So obviously the small little area we have that's 5 feet between the curb and the sidewalk's not enough to give you 1,000 cubic feet. So we're going to extend that underneath the roadway by bringing the trees down to the top of curb grade. It allows those roots to access that soil. And then also with the construction of the walls, we're looking at a method where we're not going to put a footing that goes all the way down. We're actually going to have like piers or caissons that carry a grade beam so that, again, the roots can get underneath that wall and take advantage of the soil.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for our applicants? Jenny, did we have any questions submitted from the public?
We did receive some public comments, so I'm going to pull those up and read each of those for you all. So the first one is from Kathy Lannon. She's at 37 South Riverview, and it says, I see that you will be discussing the installation of stone walls along South High Street at the ARB meeting this evening. And I have one question. I like the look, but the top of the wall appears to be level with the sidewalk. I'm wondering if there are liability issues that the city should consider before people inadvertently step off the edge. Then we received another comment from Tom Bassett at 5720 Loch Murray Court. And he is the owner of 35 South High Street. His comments are, I think the walls and tree plantings are a wonderful idea. However, it seems like a repeat of past efforts. City plants trees, the trees grow, utility company removes. The area looks like a slum area. The streets torn up, wires dominate the streetscape, and nothing changes. It's literally trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Until the plan is developed to address the real issue, planting trees and building walls is absurd. North High Street has accomplished this. Why not South High Street? I, at my own expense, rerouted all overhead lines to the back of my property at 35 South High Street and 41 West Bridge Street. Why can't the city or other property owners do the same, then replace curves, pave the street, then plant trees and construct walls? South High Street is an embarrassment, but yet is touted as the heart of the historic district. The power lines along the rear of South High also need to be cleaned up, new taller poles installed and made safer. Interesting how rigorous review and approvals required for even minor changes in this area, but the most dominant characteristic of this area is ignored. I've owned numerous properties in historic Dublin since 1974, and this is the third time trees have been planted and then removed. And I did receive some comments via the web. The first one is from Tom Holton at 5957 Roundtree Place in Dublin. His comments are, I must be clear to staff and the ARB, I'm expressing an opinion as an amateur historian, and this is not the opinion of the Dublin Historic Society. I have not discussed this with any members of the Historical Society and am no longer the president of the society. Historically, there is not a precedent for stone walls along South High Street. Primarily for this reason, absent of historic relevance, I am not in favor of the walls in this application. The planning report does not state this nor specifically indicate it in the diagrams, but the plan eliminates some of the parking on the Does the plan eliminate some of the parking on the west side? It seems this is the only way to modify the existing grades from the walkway or sidewalk to the street. One of the photos shows vehicles adjacent to 55 South High Street, where there is very little grade change, but the slope is significant, progressing south from 75 to 119 South High. I'm curious how the plan allows for walkways, tree space, stone wall, grass, and parking. And then he was having trouble getting in the meeting, so some of the presentation helped clarify that. So he did then send me a follow-up email that I'll read that says, the retaining wall versus stone wall was confusing in the planning report, but a little more clear now. Still not in favor of it. Retaining wall is going to be even more difficult for car doors as people exit unless you eliminate parking. And that is all the public comment that I've received for this application.
And I think those have been, addressed. I think Sean's clarified the height of the wall and its relationship to the sidewalk. So I think the first concern was addressed, and they'll be able to see that in the minutes if they aren't watching. And I think the second question, which I think is the big question that we're relying a lot on the staff, is how do you coordinate all this with the utilities? And Sean mentioned you're in contact with AEP, but I think that's really critical, and certainly agree with what the individual submitted. And I think we answered Tom's question with the car doors and the location of the walls. So you are looking for, staff is looking for more input from our board, whether members of as a board, we believe this is a good idea, or whether we have any misgivings about it. So with that, I'll open it up to other board members. Frank, Sean, Amy, your feelings about these walls.
Go ahead, Frank. No, go ahead.
I said the last gentleman, I can't remember his name, that Jenny mentioned, he did bring up a very good question: is are we adding history to something that didn't have it to begin with? Is this something that we should contemplate further before, the walls are fully extended all the way up to 161?
And to Frank's point, that's my biggest concern with these. I understand the need and the practicality for the retaining wall portion of these. And I might be able to get on board with certain sections having the retaining wall. But these walls would never historically have ever been here. The stone walls we have in Dublin have the bookshelf top, so they never have that flat top we would sit on. They also line property lines. They're not just random segments between blocks. So from a historical perspective, these don't fit at all. I'm also kind of concerned with just the space. Walking up and down those sidewalks, if someone is coming the other direction, you have to move off into that grass lawn. There's not enough room for, two people in a stroller or something to pass someone else going the other direction. And if there's no grass lawn to walk into, you don't want to step off the retaining wall, or how it's going to be a very tight squeeze down that sidewalk if we cut it off at the edge of the sidewalk. You really do need that grass area to accommodate the trash cans, to accommodate moving out of the way for traffic, the occasional bicyclist I've seen on there, or stroller. I just don't know how we physically can fit all of it in there and make it usable. It's already very narrow as it is. So that's my biggest concern. I think it would look nice, but it's not really appropriate.
And for me, I'm a bit to say, it looks nice, right? I think it helps eliminate some of that slope looks a little bit strange. I don't know about historically it would have looked like that, but I'm saying for me, I'm a bit concerned about, I was thinking about lighting at night, and people are trying to pass and it's not well lit and there's a shadow and you step in the wrong place. If you think there's going to be let's say 1 or 2 courses, you move over and you trip and fall in, or you just don't see that there's a difference. So I don't know how much light was going to be down there to differentiate sidewalk from darkness, but I think also, as you say, Amy, it's pretty narrow. If a bicyclist and a stroller come flying through there, just how you navigate it. I should have walked a little bit on there just to see how it was. I didn't look up, but you're right. Just looking at it from the side, it's pretty tight, and you just feel like you step off a 30-inch curb.
Yeah, you can't step out of the way or you're falling into the street.
Yeah. So that's my only that. If I put away the historic side for the second, just from a safety and just how you're ensure that you can not fall into that open area if it's dark or it's raining or you're trying to go fast and somebody's coming one way, you're going the other. You're with your elderly mother or whatever it might be. So that's certainly from a safety standpoint for me as a concern, irrespective of if it historically fits.
I had some reservations as well. I appreciated the details were a little different in these walls than the original walls, because I think one of the issues is when you go through the community, understanding what's an original historic wall and what's a non-historic wall. So I actually appreciated that the top was different and saw the need for retaining walls in those locations. I think it helps the streetscape if you have retaining walls. But I was hoping that the only place they would occur would be on the west side where they were going to be doing retaining and wouldn't run down both sides, because my fear is these will become so pronounced when you have them on both sides that they're going to become the defining element of the district, because they're going to create this continuous street wall of wall, no pun intended. I mean, literally a wall, which we kind of refer to buildings as doing, and they'll become such a prominent feature, and they're not original. So I just feel like it could be overwhelming to the streetscape visually. I personally love the landscape and wish the landscape was extremely elaborate. And I can see the need for seating and things like that along there. But I just worry it could be too much and become too dominant. So. Go ahead.
So just to kind of, right now, again, phase one is just the retaining section. So the future walls, there's no plans. We're doing a full design to look at where they might go. That's stuff that still has to be fleshed out. That is not part of this project. It's just the retaining sections. So to that point, discussion about how much more wall or not wall is completely valid. I mean, we can have those conversations. That's just, we wanted to make sure we captured in the design, the full design, that although we're not executing it all, the possibility. So we don't have to install all those walls for that point. To the point of the sidewalk width, I know what you're talking about. I totally get that. There are spaces where you can step off to the other side of the sidewalk. Private property, yes, but you could actually step to that side in most cases. There's a few cases where the buildings are right up on the edge, and I get that. You know, the tavern is one of such places. So
I think we're not voting on this tonight. It's just to provide some feedback for you and for the staff. Chase, is that the goal? Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. Yep.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything else to add on this? Okay.
No, I think the main thing I think at least three of us brought up is the fact of adding a historical element where really there isn't one to begin with, or would never have really been one to begin with, because it's not defining someone's farming area, things like that, where you normally would find a wall. So I don't know how the staff would want to address that, maybe for future relevance. I know it's a question we brought up, but I have no easy answer to give you how to go at it.
Sean?
the other thing that we wanted to get feedback from, and I know this was expressed from Jane during the council meeting, was the actual look of the walls, being that they are like we said, they're going to be modeled after the Grounds of Remembrance wall in that style. Make sure that you're comfortable with that look as a historic wall versus, a more contemporary look like on North High Street on the east side, which we would not want to do. So I wanted to make sure that we had that feedback as well, because that seemed to be the main focus in Jane's request during the council meeting to bring it here.
I think probably most people would like the Ohio limestone look, and I'm almost leaning towards making it not look as historic, because if you try to make it look too historic, then it becomes sort of a Disney feel of historic, like we're creating it. So the limestone basically becomes the facade of it, just so it feels right into the neighborhood, without necessarily looking like we're trying to fabricate a history that doesn't exist. So like Amy has said, those walls would never have been flat topped anyway. It would have had the bookends type. Go ahead, Amy. You look like you're thinking on something.
Oh, I was gonna say, I mean, for a retaining wall, it looks fine. Yeah, you can't use the bookend. I mean, especially if being right up next, then you'd really trip over that. So it's tough because I get the practical reason for doing it, but it's a really long stretch of a wall that never would have been there. And having a 6-inch lip on your sidewalk that people are gonna constantly trip over. There's, most on the other side of that sidewalk are flower beds, and I mean, there's really no way to get out of that way. So I have a tough time. I again understand the practical, so you can get your trees planted, but I don't know. I don't see how it's going to work.
Sean, for me, I think from a practical standpoint, I think the look is okay. I kind of, if it was somewhere else, I kind of like the trees like that, or raised bed or a raised sidewalk looks kind of nice.
Yeah, the look and the plan is fine.
Yeah, I think, but I don't know if you would do, but certainly looking at a bit of a risk assessment about what we see people falling off of things. I mean, let's say if you're in an industry or somewhere, people would really look and say, okay, I get the code is 30 inches, but 30 inches is a long fall.
Well, and it's really easy to just slightly step to your right at the edge of that sidewalk to let someone pass, and your ankle just twists or hits it wrong. That height of just like 6 inches sticking up over the sidewalk. People trip on curbs all the time at that height. And this would be tripping on a curb and falling over a wall. So I just don't know how that would work.
John, do you feel like we've given you enough input to get a sense of how the board feels?
I think so. Jenny, I don't know if you got an opinion too, as far as the direction or.
Yeah, I think, Councilmember Fox just wanted to hear what the board's input was on this before it proceeds forward. So I think we'll take your comments and figure out how we're going to take that back to council and let them know what the thoughts were. Yeah, and we'll have to talk amongst ourselves about it.
I do have one suggestion for when you come back. In that planning staff report, at the very end, there's like a rendering of the wall with someone walking past it, like a silhouette of someone walking past it to see how high it is. But those would be the walls on the east side where it wasn't a retaining wall. And nowhere in our packet is there any type of rendering of what the wall would look like as a retaining wall. In the height. So if we could get two different views, one being a rendering standing on High Street and looking at the wall from like where you would park, like from a parking spot, like that view looking at the wall as a retaining wall, and another view of as you're walking on the sidewalk and to your, what would it look like as the height, like where is it compared to your foot? But those two views would be really helpful when you bring it back.
Jenny, are we bringing it back? A, and then B, Chase, we could show we did have the one image that kind of shows it in its condition. in the packet or in your presentation. Sorry, it's not in the packet.
Yeah, let me see if I can bring that up. Give me one
Yeah,
sec.
the only one I saw in the drawings, like I said, it was the wall with someone walking past it.
Yeah. We didn't have that in the, I guess, in the staff report, but it was in this presentation here on the left. It's hard to see. I don't know if you can zoom in, Chase. It gets pixelated.
Yeah.
You
So
kind
it-
of get a sense of what it would be. We've got clearer images because it's just shrunk down to fit in the PowerPoint.
So it'd be to add to that also like standing on the sidewalk. So what you see height wise from like if you were standing there at the white building and looking north, what it
Mhm.
would be looking like, that would help as well.
Mhm.
Because from that image, it doesn't look like a retaining wall. It looks like a full 30-inch wall or whatever. You can't tell that it's the soil, it's banked out.
You can't see the grade difference between the sidewalk
Yeah,
and the
that's
street
what
side.
Yeah,
That's
you
what I'm
can't see
trying to
what's
say.
behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it does make sense that, if you're at the sidewalk grade and you're have only like 6 inch or whatever tripping hazard, that is, if you fall on that, you're going 2 feet.
Yeah. That's
And
the angle I'm concerned most with. If you're standing on the sidewalk and walking, what is it going to look like?
Or what would be helpful, because I think if there's a grass strip between the sidewalk and that upper lip, that grass strip and the upper lip of your retaining wall, that grass strip acts as your bumper, similar to the bumper or some way of warning someone when you walk, you're on grass. And if we had a plan that showed the specific distances and dimensions, and I know for engineering, they're going to have to work all that out. So there was space between the walk and the wall. So there was some grass there. I mean, that might help prevent people from feeling like the top of the wall is an extension of the walk. It's a hard surface. They stumble. But if there was a plan that showed all those dimensions, I think we could better evaluate things like that.
That'd be a very difficult piece of lawn to maintain and keep alive.
Well, but if somebody doesn't break their ankle as a result,
maybe a different color paver along the edge.
Or it could even be a planting bed. It could even be a planting bed of landscape material that was maintained regularly. The district, if we had regular plantings in there that were maintained regularly, that would really dress the area up, and that might be a nice place for it.
The thing is, it sounds like there's no room. Like it sounds like your wall is abutting the sidewalk.
Yeah, we're trying to maximize the tree, obviously the tree area, because that's going to give you the biggest impact as far as the district goes and getting the canopy back and all the things that go with it. We had always talked about, other planting opportunities down below between the trees and along that area where it makes sense. Again, playing off of what's retaining, what's sittable and such, and trying to figure out what that would be. But the initial step was just trying to get trees back in and at a height that would actually take advantage of the soil under the road.
Anyone have anything else?
So I don't know if it comes back to us or goes to city council, but a couple things. I just make sure that have a good plan for power lines and lighting. And I think then the other ones that everybody else was talking about there.
Yeah, lighting levels shouldn't change for what's today because the lights will stay in their positions they're at today. They'll just get lowered down. So I don't know. I haven't spent a whole lot of time walking down there in the evening, but the light levels wouldn't change from today.
But they will when you put trees in there. You'll have huge shadows between the trees that will accent the part where you can't see falling off the sidewalk. That, for me, it's about the lighting and keeping that contrast between sidewalk and where you fall off the sidewalk.
In the interim, yeah, you probably will a little bit.
Yeah.
Jenny, I had one question for you. Procedural wise, wouldn't they have to come back with an application that gets approved by us?
So since this is in the right of way and a part of a capital project, council is the group that approves this moving forward. So, and or I guess authorizes the moving forward of this design. So this is sort of a new thing for us to be bringing things for your feedback. I think the intent was to get your feedback so that staff could then go back and finalize the design, and I'm assuming report back to council on what ARB said. So it would not come back to you as far as I know at this point. So.
Okay, well then I'll say just for the record and for the minutes, I don't approve what's been presented today, in my opinion.
And also just to bounce back on whichever gentleman was that emailed, maybe contact AEP and see getting drops from the alleys instead of drops in the front of from the main street, so you can move the poles out. Because he's right, they put a bunch of trees there, they're just gonna come through eventually, whatever year that is, and start cutting them again because of their right of way for lines. And I know it's costly to move lines, and even just putting a drop on a house is costly.
Again, engineering is going to be moving those lines to the alleys, all of them. So there will be no power lines down South High Street.
Good. All right.
So then just for me how will that get reported to city council? I mean, I know now we're getting way behind, but so I mean, Amy said, and is it historically consistent, I guess maybe, and the safety that it'll be like a memo from planning to the city council. Is that how that will go?
We would follow up with a memo to them outlining the concerns and comments that you all had in the public comment that we received. And then Sean will obviously take all that back and look at what needs to be done and how to get that to them. Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll move on to our second case. Our second case is 86 Franklin Street. This is a minor project review. The application is a request for exterior modifications to an existing home that's east of Franklin Street, approximately 350 feet north of the intersection with John Wright Lane. The 0.36 acre site is zoned Bridge Street District Historic Residential. Mr. Ridge will be our presenter. So Chase, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you. So as was mentioned, this is a request for review and approval of a minor project review for exterior modifications to an existing single-family residence at 86 Franklin Street. Okay, I apologize. The not seem to want to move to the next slide. Let me try this again. Okay. So highlighted in yellow here is the site. You can see it lies in between Franklin Street to the west and Mill Lane to the east. It is approximately 0.36 acre in size, has 70 feet in width and 215 feet in length. These photos give you some context to the surrounding sites. 1 through 3 are on the west side of Franklin Street. 4 and 5 are on the east side of Franklin Street, immediately north and south of the site. You can see there's a variety of architectural styles on the street here. So these photos provide some context to the existing conditions of the front and north side of the home. You can see it is primarily clad in brick and stone, with the stone being on the west side of the home facing Franklin Street. And then these provide some context to the south and rear of the home. As you can see here, it's primarily clad in brick and excuse me. You've got an existing sunroom on the rear of the home here, which you can see in the left photo. And then you've got the garage which is on the northern portion of the home there on the right. So these are the proposed elevations. The applicant is proposing 3 new swinging doors for the pedestrian doors. So that's there's one on the front of the home, one on the south side of the home, and then one on the rear of the home. These doors will be painted in a deep blue color, which is a Calvary blue from PPG. And then on the east elevation on the bottom of your screen, you can see the new Midland flush panel garage doors, which are pretty similar to what is existing. These will be painted dark brown, a coffee color from Sherwin-Williams. And then these are the proposed north and south elevations. So the applicant is proposing the installation of 4 Velux fixed skylights with this application. So these will have an aluminum frame. They provide approximately 5.5 square feet of sunlight, and they will project approximately 4 inches above the shingles. So from the Franklin Street side of the home and from Mill Lane, these are going to be, they won't be highly visible, much less visible, obviously, if they were located on either the west or east side of the home. And then the applicant is also proposing 1 new window. So this will be located on the lower level of the north-facing side of the architectural bump out where the sunroom is. So this window will actually be a Marvin Integrity Ultrex window in a stone white finish. That's the same window that was approved in August of 2019 when this first came, the site first came through for exterior modifications. Finally, these are the proposed materials. So again, you have the swinging French door. It'll be in the Calvary blue, just to the right. The flush panel garage door. It will have, there will be no windows on the garage doors, like what is existing now. And then the fixed skylight on the far right there. This was reviewed against all applicable criteria. And staff is recommending approval with 1 condition tonight, that just being that the applicant provide a windowsill for that proposed window that is consistent with the other windows on the home. So I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have, and the applicant is also in attendance tonight. Thank you.
Gary, do you want to go ahead? Oh, you're on mute, Gary.
Yep.
Gary, you're still on mute. Uh-oh. Nope, can't hear you, Gary. What is? I don't have any questions offhand. Amy?
I don't have any questions either.
I'm back. All right, does the applicant want to say anything?
I think that Chase covered everything, so.
Are you okay with the condition?
Well, I missed one. What's the condition again?
It's just that that newly proposed window on the rear of the home, we just want to ensure that there's a sill. Okay.
Yeah, we can provide that.
Great.
Jenny, do we have any public comment?
No public comments.
Okay. All right, it sounds like there's no further discussion. Is there a motion to approve as amended?
I'll make the motion to approve as amended.
Second,
Ms. Cram,
yes.
Mr. Kaneki,
Yes.
Mr. Cotter,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Our next case is more input from our board, whether members of as a board. All right. Our next case is the Beauty Collective. It's a sign at 82 South High Street. This is a minor project review. The application is a request for installation of a 4.4 square foot projecting sign for an existing tennis space southeast of the intersection of South High Street and Eberly Hill Lane. The 0.37 acre site is zoned Bridge Street District, Historic South. Mr. Gantner will be our presenter. Kenneth, I don't think we've met you before. Welcome.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for
go
having
ahead.
me. Alrighty. Let me get it pulled up here.
Well, Kenny's getting started. He's one of our planning assistants. He's a grad student at Ohio State, just so you all know who he is.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is a request for a minor project review for a new projecting sign located within historic Dublin at 82 South High Street. The site is located southeast of the intersection of South High Street and Eberly Hill Lane. The site contains two existing detached commercial structures, and they sit on 0.37 acres of land. The photos that you see here are existing conditions of the west elevation that faces South High Street, which is the west facade. On the right shows the existing condition of the existing sign bracket that will be used by the tenant. The proposed projecting sign on the west facade facing South High Street is 32 inches in height and 20 inches in width for a total of 4.4 square feet. The sign consists of the business name centrally located on the rectangular borders which surround the business name. The proposed sign is constructed of a routed 1.5 inch thick HDU material, which is high density urethane. The white copy and border are raised with the proposed sign having two colors being black and white. The location of the projecting sign provides 9 feet and 4 inches of clearance between the bottom of the sign and the sidewalk. The height of the sign is 11 feet, which is established from the grade and to the top of the sign. The sign is affixed to the building using the existing black Classics metal sign bracket. The previous tenant that was occupying the space was using the metal black sign bracket that is there right now. Okay. The previous tenant submitted a sign plan that proposed the sign being in the right of way. The planning staff has communicated with the engineering division regarding the proposed condition of the sign being in the right of way, and it's ultimately supportive of the location of the sign on the sign plan. Planning staff has reviewed the minor project against all applicable criteria, and staff recommends approval with one condition. Being that the condition that the applicant update the plans to provide text dimensions before submitting for a sign permit, subject to staff approval.
Are the
board has?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. If the board has any questions for staff tonight, I am here to answer them, and also the applicant is also here to address the board as well.
Thank you. Does the applicant have anything to add?
Yeah,
Does it?
we went ahead and submitted the sign dimensions. We're going to stay the same.
And you submitted the letters?
Yeah, and I submitted the letters.
Kenny, has the staff received that, or are you still, is it being processed? Where is that?
The staff has received the initial submission that had the initial text dimensions on them. When the applicant altered the design of the initial submission, we were not sure if the text dimensions stayed the same. So we asked the applicant to send us a revision copy that shows updated text dimensions.
So, okay. So has that been submitted yet, or is that what you're waiting for?
We are waiting for that currently.
Okay. All right. Okay. Does any board member have a question for Mr. Gantner or the applicant?
Okay, I just maybe just have one question. What's the because I'm trying to look through the code, the criteria for reviewing the letters. What just if you give me a little, what does that mean exactly? I didn't see anywhere where there was. I know you can only have 20% for background and other things, but is there a criterion for how big the letters can be or how much space it can take? I just didn't see where that was spelled out anywhere.
So the criteria, there's no criteria that says anything about, the spacing of the letters or the text dimensions, but as staff reviewed this in a group, we saw that there is a little inconsistence about the sign and the business name. That's why we were able to condition that for this application.
I'm still not sure clear. What's the if there's not a criterion, what was the condition? I'm just trying to understand what is there some that the applicant knows that there was an issue or there wasn't an issue?
The condition is for the applicant just before they submit a permanent sign permit that they show us, if the text dimensions are the same or if they are, updated.
Let me ask you a question. Let me try to ask your question differently, Sean. I think you're asking if there's stated documentation about the limits of text height. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, it's a bit just so when somebody, like you say, you're given a condition, they bring some, just to make sure you don't get in kind of a cycle that I'm just trying to, for me, it's first time I heard that to condition what the text looks like. Just trying to understand if there's a, yeah, as you say, a rubric or something that says it has to look something like this or take that much space or be so big.
Yeah, I think Chase was trying to chime in on that, but then it looks like he got dropped out of the meeting. So it's not the dimension of the letters. It is that 20% requirement is my understanding. So we just want to make sure that the graphic matches the numbers. That's what the condition is. So we're trying to make sure that we're meeting the overall size sign requirements.
Because for me, graphics are 20%. I didn't see anything about letters. I'm just trying to get some clarity around that. Graphics, I saw 20% maximum graphics, but not on the letters. Just only, as we say, we're trying to make it so it's easier for applicants to come through, just to make sure we have something that lets them know what it should look like.
I think they were just looking for the dimensions of all of the graphic signs. So the square boxes, how thick is that line, and how thick is well, there's two square boxes, and how thick is the lettering? So then when they add it all up, does it fit within that 20%?
Yes, thank you, Amy. Yes.
Yeah.
If that's what it is, it's not clear in the code because it says it talks about, okay, maybe graphics in total can only be 20%. And then I look back to the Domino's Pizza one, which looks to me with it'll come back. Maybe we have to take this in an offline because I'm not concerned about the sign. It's more of a trying to make sure I understand the sign code.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll table that for
Okay,
another
all right,
time.
yeah, we can clarify that.
Yep,
It's,
okay.
again, the condition is to make sure they're meeting the code requirement about the 20%. Yes.
Maybe we have to come back to the code requirement. Okay.
Jenny or Kenny, have we had any public comments about this?
I have not received any. I don't know about Kenny. No, okay.
I have not received any as well.
Okay. Board members, general feelings about this?
It's okay for me.
Yeah.
Okay, is there a motion to approve this with the one condition?
I can make the motion to approve with one condition from staff.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
I should have asked, and before we call for a vote, maybe I should ask the applicants, do they understand, and are you okay with the condition? You understand the condition?
Yes, we do.
All right. Okay, thanks.
Ms. Cram,
Yes.
Mr. Kaneki,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Mr. Cotter,
Yes.
You're approved. Okay. Thank you. All right, we're on to item 4. Dublin Chamber of Commerce at 129 South High Street, minor project review. This application is a request for additions to the north and west elevations of an existing building northwest of the intersection of South High Street and John Wright Lane. The 0.25 acre site is zoned Bridge Street District, Historic South. Ms. Roush will be our presenter, and so Jenny, turning it over to you.
Great. Can everybody see my presentation? Okay, great. Okay, so as you mentioned, this is, I'm going to present cases 4 and 5, but individually. So I'll just go from one to the other so I don't have to repeat the same information. So the first application that we're going to look at tonight is a minor project and a waiver request for the chamber building. The site, as I'm sure you all are aware, is located at the corner of John Wright Lane and South High Street. As you can see, the building is located up against the High Street frontage with the parking lot located to the rear. I have some context photos for you here so you can get a sense of the existing character and style of the building. And as we go through the site plan, I can point out where the additions are. But on this front elevation along South High Street, you'll see the existing covered porch area that's is proposed to be enclosed as part of this application, as well as then on the picture to the right of your screen, you'll see the area where then that northern addition will be sort of filled in between the existing portions of the building. Some additional context photos. The one on the left shows that vehicular access off of John Wright Lane, as well as then looking from Mill Lane to the rear of the site. And then again, another front view on the left side of that courtyard, which will be relevant for the informal discussion piece. But again, you have a more close-up view of that covered porch area that'll be enclosed, as well as then on the right-hand side, the parking lot that exists on the So in terms of a proposal for this evening, the applicant is requesting to create 2 additions to the existing building shown here in the hatched areas. So the northern addition here will align with the existing wall and retain the same setbacks as required by code. So they're within, it won't be any located any closer than 5 feet. So they'll be located appropriately there, as well as then you see then on the eastern side of the building, the proposed addition under that covered porch as well. So the proposal for these 2 additions is approximately 350 square feet. In terms of other development requirements, the building coverage code permits 50%, they're at 32. With regard to the impervious coverage, we noted in the report, and that is what the waiver request is for. This building type would permit a 65% lot coverage, but the applicant is requesting 73. And staff provided some background related to this particular site and the zoning over the last couple of years, as this has been a relevant topic for the board. So the existing lot coverage already exceeds that 65% requirement. And in terms of background, the previous zonings for this would have been upwards of 85% as the maximum impervious coverage, as the zoning has been changed over time to now the historic South District that has been reduced. So the applicant is requesting a waiver for that, and staff is supportive given they're not expanding the area with that, or excuse me, they're expanding these areas within sort of the existing footprint of the building. I have some proposed elevations here that shows how the addition will fit in with the architecture and design and color with the existing building. This then shows that east elevation as well with the front porch enclosure, proposing natural wood siding to match in terms of color and material, as well as then windows will match the existing. So with that, staff, as I mentioned, is has reviewed this and makes a recommendation of approval of the waiver to allow for the increased lot coverage for this particular application, and then reviewed it against the minor project criteria as well as the ARB requirements, and recommends approval of the minor project with no conditions. So this application will require 2 motions should the board wish to proceed with that. And I'm available to answer any questions, and the applicant is here as well.
Jenny, thanks. I'm sure we'll have questions. Does the applicant have anything he wishes to add?
Bill Andrews here. Can everybody hear me?
I can.
Thank you. No, I think that pretty much covers the intent of the application, but we'll be pleased to address any questions you may have.
Okay. Board members, do you have questions for the applicant or Jenny?
Maybe just some clarification. In the packet, there was one part we talked about trying to see if we could increase the impervious. I can't remember what it was called in the packet, but trying to find if we could find a place to find that 3% impervious somewhere else, at least to keep it at the equal. I saw in the original packet said they were going to look into that. Is that was not feasible or not practical, or what was the reason? I don't know if it was looked into and just found not able to be done.
I did propose that. I'll let Mr. Andrews answer.
Yep.
Again, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that was brought to our attention, and the only area that might have some potential is off the parking lot in the rear of the building, and parking is at a premium right now. We just didn't want to advance the notion of maybe eliminating 1 or 2 parking spots. So that was the only area we had that had any potential. So
okay.
We looked at it, just wasn't, I don't think it's good for the property or for the users of the property.
All right, if Amy and Frank, you don't have any questions for the applicant, Jenny, I have one. The number that Sean was referring to, Jenny, is that current number 70%? I mean, I guess I'm just subtracting the 3, but it's 70% where they are currently.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Maybe before we get into the deliberations, are there any public comments on this?
I did not receive any comments on this, no.
Okay. All right. So now I'll open it up for general feelings about this, board members. We have 2 issues: the minor project review for its appropriateness, and then the other issue is the waiver to the impervious cover.
I was gonna say, normally I'm not for the waivers, but it seems like we're already at that point. I can understand why a waiver could be acceptable in such an instance as this. So really, I don't really have any questions on it, other than just making that statement about the waiver.
Yeah, I'm a bit the same, right? We tend to, okay, in the last 6 months that I've been on here, we tend to be very judicious with trying to hand out a waiver for lot coverage. And without looking into, where you could have put, and I see it's the perfect spot, right? I see why it ends up in that spot. It fits really well, but to see where it could have fit inside the building or at the back, or, could have sat somewhere that was already pre-impervious, because certainly we, at least the last few times, we've given homeowners quite a lot of challenges on why we would be above the code limit. So, yeah, I'm a bit torn on trying to give waivers when we've been not very accommodating to a waiver. But at the moment, it's hard for me to see a different way at the moment.
Amy, do you have anything?
The additions are appropriate. The project, like, that's fine. It comes down to the waiver, and honestly, unless we tell them they have to remove 2 parking spots, I don't see how we can do it otherwise. And I'm fine with telling you to lose the parking lot spots if that's what the board wants, but I'm okay with it because to me, it's kind of a grandfathered in situation where the code used to allow them to have more anyway, and they're already over anyway. Now, I'll keep that in mind. Like, it's relevant to the next. The other thing is it's relevant to the next case, in my opinion.
Yep.
So I'm willing to waive it for the ADA compliant restroom, and I'll just leave it at that because I'm not for the other stuff in the next application. So for this particular instance of the restroom and the additions, they are built appropriately. They're built where they should be built on the structure. I'm okay with it.
All right, I guess I'll chime in with my, there are 2 issues I have. I don't think I think the additions are simple and from a builder point of view are logical. But from a preservation point of view, that little building that exists has some very subtle things going on to separate that building from the historic structure in front. If you look at the way the north side pulls back, what was done initially was created almost a choke point. So it's hard to see the connection between the original building and the addition at the rear. It's a common strategy. In fact, you don't line up walls when you want to differentiate something that's historical. We talk about it in architectural terms as a reveal. We frequently even change the materials, and that's what was done there. You see that wall that touches it is full of fenestration. So it's not very sensitive to the thinking that went on before. And the same thing in the front porch. The front porch animates the street. The front porch is also fenestration. And here again, that front porch separates its fenestration. It separates the solid body of that little addition or that little existing building from this addition. So whoever did those was thinking about, and the previous board may have requested those things be done to differentiate this from. Now, our standards aren't quite as doctrinaire as that, but those things are very clear in design circles. So what the response is, a very simple response, will fill in the open space. Well, fill in the open space. I could give, I don't think the additions are very sensitive to what was done in the original thinking in the historic building. I could give maybe a little bit on those, but not the lot coverage, because the lot coverage waiver, we're holding others accountable in the area to strict lot coverage. And I say we need more green space. A site like this that's paved and it's becoming more paved and more solid. I mean, environmentally, that's not good. That's not a good practice. So Maybe part of the parking lot becomes permeable pavers. Maybe they introduce more landscape. Maybe they take out 2 spaces. But I personally will not support that motion. And I think it puts us, it may make it difficult in other situations where we have requests that where people want to exceed some of our standards. So that's just how I feel about it. So.
And I'm okay supporting Gary with requiring them to remove some type of pavement from somewhere to make up the difference of the restroom addition.
Yeah.
I'm in support of that. One thing, Gary's completely right about the additions. The one thing that I was able to overcome or allowed me to be okay with these is they're not making the wall flush with the front building. There is a 5 foot, 10 inch gap there. So it is going to be clear what the original core was. It's definitely not as clear as it is now.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not as good as it is now, but I think they're doing good with what they have, I guess. So I'm willing to accept that, but I can definitely support the saying no to the waiver and making. So do they still need a waiver if they hit 70%?
Would not, because that's existing. That would be non-conforming.
That's existing. Okay, so if they can make up that 3% somewhere in the pavement they've got on that property, I'm fine with that.
Just this is non-contributing, right? What am I looking here? Am I reading in this thing, right?
That was my understanding as part of the.
I'm looking in the.
Review. Mm-hmm.
And the reason this.
It is. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the reason the survey would have called it non-contributing is because the addition is not subordinate to the main original old building. I mean, the addition is 3 times the size of that original building. But it is still clear where that original historic building is and what, I mean, it's very distinct and noticeable from High Street what the original section is.
Mm-hmm. And it's just, I'm a bit with, as I talked earlier, I mean, as we start to really hold everybody's feet to the fire on lot coverage, this one feels like somehow we do something that somehow we again have to defend someone coming in saying, well, we had somebody come in and you gave them 3% or 5%. Why don't I get that? It's a never ending cycle, right? That doesn't stop. I mean, I see why they're doing it. And for me, I agree with Amy, putting it there is quite okay. But somehow I got to, again, I think it's the 375 feet.
So Jenny, is it possible to add a condition to the vote on the plan that says they need to remove that 3% somewhere on the property, and we can approve the plan, but then deny the waiver? And then that way that it would, is that possible to do, to move them along?
Yes.
Okay.
It'd probably save them from coming back to us again, right, Jenny?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, if we can add the condition of approval on the plan would be that they find their 3% somewhere and remove whether it's a parking spot or the pavers out front considered.
Yeah, permeable.
Yeah, whatever surfaces are considered in that count. That would be my suggestion. I'd be okay with it.
Yeah.
And I would be fine with that too.
Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable, kind of gets the grandfather part in, and it's a reasonable outcome.
Is the applicant, Mr. Andrews, do you have anything you want to say, or?
First of all, I appreciate everyone's perspectives on that 3% issue, and I believe it's reasonable. Again, my client is the city of Dublin, so I will bring this to them, and I think it's reasonable to look for surfaces that are, get this 3% behind us. So appreciate your input on all of that.
And what Mr. Andrews pointed out, the fact that the client is the city of Dublin, maybe more reason why it may be suspect if we grant a waiver in this situation.
No,
I would-
again, and I think it's it's important to collectively, all of us, do the best we can for what the intent of this project is, and I think some material changes to get that 3% in order is a reasonable request.
Okay.
Good.
Jenny, were there any public comments?
I did not receive any comments. So I drafted a condition then for the minor project review that the applicant work with staff to revise the plan to maintain the existing 70% lot coverage. Does that sound satisfactory to everyone?
Yes.
Works for
Good.
me.
That's fine.
Okay.
Sean, are you signaling us?
No,
or-
there's somebody knocking on my door, and I'm giving them up. I'm giving up. Just give me a second here.
All right, didn't want to cut you out.
Yeah.
Okay, so should we vote first on the motion to approve the waiver?
Yes, I will. Let me share my screen just so you can see that. So it's typically, if you're not wanting to approve something, it's easier to make a motion in the affirmative and then vote no if you are against it. So,
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yes. Is there someone who would like to make a motion?
I'm not even sure how to
I'll move to
word that for me.
I say I'll move to approve the waiver.
And then we need a second.
Okay, I'll second that motion.
All right.
So let me just be clear. We're moving to approve.
Correct.
And if you
Okay.
don't want, then if you don't want
Then
to,
the
then
answer,
you say
if you
no.
don't want to, the answer is no. Yeah, okay.
Yes, correct.
Mr. Kaneki,
No.
Mr. Alexander,
No.
Mr. Cotter,
No.
Ms. Cram.
No.
Thank you. All right. So Jenny, you've probably already rewritten the other one.
Yes, do you see that on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, it should be at the bottom there, the minor project review with
Yep.
one condition.
Okay.
And I'll make the motion to approve the minor project review with the one condition.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Cotter,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Ms. Cram,
Yes.
Mr. Kaneki.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So then we're moving on to item 5. And Jenny,
Hey, Gary, can you just give me 1 second? This person keeps waiting. They're trying. Just give me one, just to go tell them to. I'll be right back. Thanks.
okay. All right.
Want me to hold the presentation or
Um,
you can, that's fine.
well,
Jenny, I think he was asking for you to wait.
Okay,
okay, he's back.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back.
okay. So the second application before you is obviously on the same site, and this is a request for informal review and feedback. So the informal review is for the a proposed almost 300 square foot pavilion that's located over an existing area out front of the building. So it's located forward of the structure. It will include a, let me go to the next slide so you can see what this looks like. So the proposal is for then a covered pavilion area that has columns that support it, and the existing retaining wall will be maintained and extended in some portions. And then the area underneath it would be paved with brick that would match then the existing walkway. In terms of color and materials, they're proposing to match the column color to the building, and the proposed roof material would match the shingles on the existing building. As we discussed with the previous application, the inclusion of this pavilion would then increase the impervious structure, or impervious coverage further to, again, assuming it was a 73 with the addition, it would now be 76. but with our revision would then be 73%. So with that, staff wanted to get some feedback as well as the applicant, looking at then the proposed scale and massing and location of the accessory structure and how that fits with the character of the neighborhood, understanding the orientation and placement of that on the lot and its consistency with the guidelines and the code, and then the proposed materials and design and how that fits with the historic district, and then whether that complements the primary structure, and then any other considerations or things that the board would want to discuss.
Mr. Andrews, do you want to add anything?
Maybe as just by amplifying the moment, just share with everyone why is this being proposed, and this is really an outgrowth of a series of discussions and meetings with the chamber, and it's how it sees itself working with its membership in the years ahead, and then also working with our landlord, the city of Dublin, and sort of sharing those thoughts. And what really the impetus is that as we can all appreciate, once we're back into actually in-person meetings and gatherings in the future, there is just a greater need for those kinds of things. And membership just was looking for places not only in the building but outside the building to have informal get-togethers, do some collaboration, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's also equally important to remind all of us that this facility down here on High Street, South High Street, is also a public place. The restrooms that are in the building that were discussed just a minute ago for that one cause for that slight addition is the need to bring those into ADA compliance. And those restrooms are open to the public, during business times. And to my amazement, used quite frequently by folks shopping in the area, others that just know that there's a safe place to have restroom facilities they can go to. So if you think of that, and then the fact that there's at times groups just coming through up and down the streets, enjoying themselves, taking great interest in the historic area, just a place to sit and relax. And I think if I'm correct in this, and that's the South High Street area, there really is not a public place to just sit and relax. And so that's, let's call that the innocent thought. And then we put it out in front of this body tonight for input, knowing that there's some, arduous tests that you folks are being asked to measure this by. And just want to see where we, where that conversation takes us. So thank you.
Board members, do you have any questions for Jenny or for Mr. Andrews?
Jenny, was there permanent seating in that? I don't remember reading. Is that in, Mr. Andrews, is it going to have permanent seats in there, or are they mobile? Or is there a big
it's mobile.
table? It's mobile.
It's quite frankly yet to be defined. There's going to be some, a little casual seating, and then folks, including myself, like to sit in taller chairs sometimes. So there's just a couple high top, almost like cafe style things. Those are all the kind of things that probably in a wintertime might be put into storage. Probably no different than a person's home.
Jenny, was there any public comment on this?
No, I have not received any.
Okay.
May I, again, Bill here, if I could just amplify that for a moment. Again, it's an evolving process, but I asked the chamber, the tenant in the building, to knock on the neighbors' doors, show them this application, the renderings, and see what they thought. And what I've heard and reported through today was that the neighbor immediately south of the chamber building, it's a home across the alley there, is in support of it. Again, this is third party. You don't have to take my word for it, but this is what was reported to me, that that person thought it was a good idea. And across the street on the other east side of High Street, one small business, I believe it's a quilting or knitting business, thought it was a great idea. Another neighbor was not home, another business, and the property immediately to the north of this building, which was the Party Panache business, is in some transition of ownership, and those parties we just couldn't find. So in other words, it's not a definitive response, but I think for those that the chamber was able to talk to, did not seem to want to oppose this concept.
And as designed, this is always going to be open to anybody on the street. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So it won't be as some limitation like please, don't sit down. It's got to be there for everyone.
And there's no gate to it limiting access at any time.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. I think we're in the deliberation stage. So how do you feel?
Well, I'll go ahead and say I support the concept, but the numbers really don't work. I mean, we just denied them a waiver for a bathroom, so I don't see how it's even possible to give them a waiver for this. I think there's ways they could make that a more accessible patio and usable space than it exists today. I mean, they do have some benches out there, or they did at one time. I don't know if they're there now, but they did have a couple benches out there that and people could use this as a seating area, a public seating area anyway. I don't see how we could after we just said no to the other 70%. So the other concept being too, and it was mentioned in the planning report, that is an accessory structure, and those are typically at the rear of a property and not right out front along the main street. So now
For me, it feels like
yeah,
exactly. It feels like it dominates a bit the front, but could they do it a different way? Something impervious, some sort of roof that's more flexible. I don't know what it could be, but certainly making it more. Odds are people being out there in the winter is probably low. So could there be just a different way to make it? If you just look at the picture, I think it looks nice, but it's really just sticks right there on the corner of High Street and what is that, John Wright? Yeah. It feels like it dominates the front of the building at that point. And I agree. 3% more again is a challenge, but I think you could make that. I feel like you could find a way to make that more impervious with some engineered features.
Frank?
I was just gonna say they pretty much said everything. I mean, I like the idea, where it's coming from, why they're going to do this, but also the design as it's sticking right out in the front of the building, right on the main street. The design of it, it's pretty not there. It just doesn't really hit me with anything that makes it feel historic or anything that would, add to the neighborhood or add to the street thoroughfare. If it was in the back, sure, it'd be fine. The design wise, I wouldn't bother with it, but up front, it just sort of doesn't strike me as anything that you would see in a historic district or fitting that time period at all. Why would it be there? That's it.
I could see this if it was considered a pocket park. If it didn't have the structure, I think the structure detracts once again from the historic building. But the idea that it's also available to the public, and if it was more green, when I look at the rendering, I know the rendering's early, you're just trying to get ideas, but when I look at the rendering, it's like more solid, undifferentiated surface. And if it was a pocket park and pretty heavily landscaped, and it's treated as an amenity for the community, not for everybody, not for occupants of that building. They can use it too, but the whole street can use it. Then I think you can make the argument you're really giving something back to the community. It's not overwhelming the historic structure. If you went over a little, I could more easily rationalize not the structure so much, but going over a little bit in that area, because it's an amenity. You're building in an amenity for the neighborhood. But I'd like to see more green and an elaborate landscape plan that really created something special there. I mean, maybe there's even we have a fountain down in the corner. I mean, maybe there's even a fountain that's a focal point. But I like the idea of an amenity for that little area.
I'll agree. I totally agree with Gary. I'd be willing to give them another percentage of lot coverage. Like they could extend the existing stone wall that runs parallel to the building is already there. I'd be willing to allow them to make that perpendicular wall on the corner to really frame the space. And then they could plant it in grass and put, like you said, some type of landscaping, something that is permeable, but like I was saying, I mean, just a nice grassy little park with some benches, something else that I would totally support. I just don't think the structure works.
So I think that's, pretty much everybody's ideas. I mean, does it even really need a roof per se? The sun is going southerly and down on the west side. So everything, relatively speaking, in the afternoon, the sun wouldn't even be coming straight down on that spot, as far as I can think of it in my head. So maybe eliminating the roof structure altogether and make it like a miniature pocket park, which is, I know, usually an entire parcel. But, something like that could work out well. And that also means you're not getting into, removing more space. It still remains permeable.
Sean, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I think you said that if we can make it permeable and like you say, some more, more temporary roofing, fabrics, things you could put out there. If you had something where you knew you were going to be out there, you could put something over it that's more temporary, that fits something for a day that you're going to be under there and it's going to be hot. But I think there's some ways that thinking through it, you could find it. I think you're right. Find a good way to keep the green space, but keep some sun off and not overdo the lot coverage.
Okay. All right. Do you, Jenny, Mr. Andrews, do you feel like you've gotten enough feedback from the board on this?
Bill here again. Yes, appreciate your input. Good points. So we'll get back with our team and huddle up and see what we can do with your thoughts, which I think are all very good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. All right, we're going to move on to our last item on the agenda this evening, the Property Maintenance Code update. This is an administrative request for a code amendment. The application is for an amendment to section 153.076 of the City of Dublin zoning code to provide regulations for enforcement procedures and additional property maintenance regulations. Ms. Noble will be our presenter. You're already on the screen, so I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I've met everyone, but I typically work in the long range planning division. So I'm thankful to have some time with the board. The following code modification is a result of a meeting that we've had with both the Architectural Review Board and the Planning and Zoning Commission that was conducted in the early portion of June. The topic is the Property Maintenance Code. We've been asked by City Council to address whether or not we think the current Property Maintenance Code addresses the aesthetic requirements and or enforcement requirements that we think are feasible or appropriate for our community. So we've actually been discussing this for several years. Recently, I went to the Public Service Commission, and then again the joint committee with the ARB and the Planning and Zoning Commission. So with the combination of comments that we've acquired up until the point of the June meeting, planning has drafted the current code modifications that we're at least proposing for feedback. I want to be very explicit that this is just something that we're trying to get some feedback from this group. It's not in the formal adoption process. Sorry, I couldn't figure out the word. Adoption process. So we wanted to talk to you distinctly about what we heard and how we've incorporated those comments into a draft code. So if you will allow me, we have taken a section of the zoning code that's currently in place. It's section 153.076, which is a section of the code that addresses nuisance violations. And what we've attempted to do was add language that we thought and hope will address some of the issues that we've heard from, again, this board and the Planning and Zoning Commission. As just a general recap of what we heard from the June meeting, we heard 4 things. One, we wanted to define and basically define and segregate the idea of a vacant structure opposed to an abandoned structure. 2, we wanted to talk about the enforcement process and make it an enforcement process that we understand and that's accumulative and progressive. 3, we really wanted to focus on securing buildings. It was expressed in a number of different settings that we were not pleased in how securing buildings were taking place in a number of ways. How materialistically, how they were being secured, and secondarily, how time-wise they were being secured or not secured in a timely fashion. So given that feedback, we have added a particular section to this nuisance section. I guess I'll pause for just a second and just ask if there's any questions about the background. No, okay. So how we structured this draft code, and we did this internally, so we appreciate your comments and feedback in any way, shape, and form. The first and foremost is the definition section, which refers back to a general definition section that we have for the entire code. And we've added 2 definitions, one with a secured building and a vacant structure. And that was directly impacted by the comments that we received, honestly, by this board and the Planning and Zoning Commission. We did do some modifications based on other codes that we found, but we wanted to acquire a list of items that we thought would attribute to a vacant structure. So that's the first and foremost question that we want to pose to the board. Moving on to the, I guess, the more meaty part of the draft code, we on page 4, there is a section that's called vacant structures. And what we essentially did was we essentially said, what is a vacant structure? What is our intent? When are we going to secure these buildings? How are we going to secure these buildings? And in what fashion, form, or otherwise will we consider a property not maintaining appropriate measures. So if you look down the entirety of the section, I think the most important part of the sections, if you look at section 2B, we talked about, we've had some issues with properties that are not being secured and at either a timely fashion or they're timely, but they're not in the manner that we would actually want or desire in the future. So this actually presents a time frame for property owners to secure a building in a timely fashion, but within 30 days, secure it in a time frame and a manner that we think is appropriate for the surrounding community. The last part of the amendment is something that we've taken from actually a code in Illinois, where we have acquired a whole list of different types of structural integrity issues that we've included into the code that we would require maintenance and foresight for enforcement. This is lacking in our current code. Essentially, our current code just says that you'll secure a building, but it doesn't talk about some root causes that we have with issues such as roofing, chimneys, foundation walls, those sorts of things that if they're not taken care of properly can result in long-term maintenance issues. So we've actually added them to the code so we can deal with property owners in a more precise manner and hopefully get those issues maintained in a fashion that will prevent any type of long-term maintenance issues. And having said that, that's the bulk of what we're proposing for the board. I will say, just in general, this is an informal discussion. Again, we're not asking for any type of recommendations. We're just attempting to get some comments on the draft language so we can then proceed into a procedural process for adoption. And of course, I can answer any questions that you have.
Anybody have any questions?
Maybe just one, and just it's a bit more verbiage than anything else, because when it talks in the beginning about the definitions, and it talks about a vacant structure, and it has to be one of the other things, and it's been vacant, secured for 30 days. I just want to make sure that we're not, because there's certain places will be vacant for a certain, somebody, you're in transition, and I'll talk about more of a business property of some sort, and you're transitioning and it's secured. And I wasn't quite, I see, does that put it in some list somewhere? I'm just trying to say, if it's vacant and it's secured, so that's two of the things, does it end up on a list somewhere? Just not to have too much administrative part to this, that I was just unsure if that, just how we define vacant, if it's vacant for let's say a purpose, right? Somebody moves out and you don't have anybody to put back in it for a while, and you've secured it till you get that next tenant, let's say.
No, honestly, that's an excellent question. It goes back to, we originally presented this to the Planning and Zoning Commission last week, and we talked about an exemption clause of whether there are certain instances, whether they're they filed for demo permits and they just haven't acquired, either they've not acquired them or they're in the process of establishing doing the work basically, or whether they're, they're in the process of getting a building permit and they haven't got a building permit. I think we're going to end up adding some sort of exemption clause that would not just say to the average person, if the structure has been isolated for 30 days, and let's just say, I'm going to just pick one, the utilities are cut off, that automatically subjects you to this process.
Okay, because otherwise you get into a lot of administrative details that hopefully most of the time aren't needed. Okay, I think that would be a good way. Okay.
Right.
Hey, Tammy.
Yep.
a couple things I got in the same area we were talking about. I noticed, maybe you probably actually, it looks like got this from the Columbus Code, but you use the word vacant to describe itself.
Mhm.
You shouldn't really use the same, defining a word, you can't really use the same word to define it. That's under vacant, I think it was said. But a couple of these are actually redundant. Is damage to an extent which prohibits safe human occupancy. At least in the City of Columbus Code, that becomes an unsafe order that a code officer would write, which is the same thing as is under a condemnation notice or legal order to vacate. If it's condemned, it's an unsafe building. So they kind of dub up a little bit. And just, I think we're trying to get a little bit too wordy sometimes in some of these, where we could just actually just bring it back a little bit. Same with the permits, or excuse me, same with the utilities. In the City of Columbus, I deal with vacant structures all the time, and I'll go to houses that have been vacant for almost a decade, and then the power is still on, the box is still hot. So I'm not sure if that really can have any relevance, yes or no, if the house is vacant or not by utility.
Well, that Frank, that goes to my point. I don't know that the term under definition vacant structure is the term we should be using. I really think we should be using like a derelict building or something, because by definition, derelict means something in very poor condition that's in disuse. So
or blighted. We usually use like blighted property.
Derelict. I just don't think vacant is the right. I think vacant opens a huge can of worms. We have so many snowbirds who aren't here for 3 months. That's way over your 30 days you're putting there. The house is technically vacant. And then, you add one of those other things on there, and then, so I just think it should be in poor condition, plus one of these things that's open to trespass, that's been 30 days or whatever. I think vacant is just going to be way too hard administratively to manage and define and deal with. The rest, the other code that you added about what to do, how to secure it and all that, that's all great. I just think the problem lies in the word vacant.
Amy, that's a really good point, because we've really struggled with this, because where do you separate I've moved away and I just haven't sold my building to I'm neglecting my building and I'm intentionally not doing anything so I don't know if it's, I think Planning and Zoning Commission was talking about vacant plus something, like vacant plus
but sometimes the house isn't even vacant and it's got all those other qualities. There are two houses that I am quite aware of on the east side of the river that have at least 2 or 3 of these 1 out of 8 things, but somebody lives there and they should have to follow the same code about securing their property and fixing their fence and fixing all that stuff, even when someone's living there. So that's why I don't know that occupancy should really have that big of a, I think it should be more of the condition of the building.
Right, and with condition that, like the first one is open to casual entry or trespass, that's covered usually elsewhere in the code of a building that is empty, non-occupied, even if it, like we're talking about demolitions, even in the City of Columbus, even if the permit's pulled already for demolition, if somebody breaks into it a day before the demolition, you still have to resecure that structure. You cannot leave it open no matter what. So, I think you're kind of doubling up codes already a little bit that might already exist. Now, I'm not 100% in the Dublin code aspect of it, but I know that, mentioning it here doesn't really mean it's vacant or not. It's kind of like subject to, because of it's, being vacant, it has to be secured, not just because it's not secure makes it vacant. You know what I'm saying? It's got a weird doubling up.
So yeah, I think, like I said, derelict or blighted, or there's other terms I think that might be more applicable.
We usually abandoned. We usually use vacant and or abandoned structure a lot of times, and that means that somebody's given up on the building, left it, things of that nature. Because
That's
I know it gets
illegal.
a Ray.
That gets an illegal can of worms because abandon is a very specific legal term.
Yeah, that's why I have an and or. Yeah.
So, and again, like I said, I'm quite aware of some places where people are living there, or at least periodically live there in and out, and it should have to follow the stuff that you outlined on page 4 and 5.
I mean, Amy, that's the point. I mean, we actually started with vacant and abandoned, and how can you, well, if it's abandoned, it's obviously vacant, but I mean, abandoned has a very, there's legal ramifications to an
Yeah,
abandoned
it's a very
structure.
specific.
Usually you can't find the owners, the taxes haven't been paid, that
Mhm.
kind of thing. That's why we have the and or for that one, for abandoned structure. A vacant.
But again, we have a lot of people,
Yeah.
even in historic district, who own a building, don't live anywhere in the state, and they rent it out, and it sits unrented for a long period of time, way more than 30 days.
Yeah.
And some of them might be kind of derelict and in need of this stuff, and some of them aren't. Some are perfectly fine. But
Well,
by this,
that's maybe why they have the actual second part, because a house could be for sale, empty, vacant, but it is not unsound, has no unsafe orders on it. It's secured properly. So I think that's why you get into the second.
yeah, the 1 through 8, yeah, pretty
right.
much. I just don't know that vacant is the right word. It's just
I mean,
my
Columbus
two
has to be vacant too, unfortunately, and probably most cities do, I'd imagine. If you do the research into other cities' code, I'm sure vacant's probably the terminology they use.
I mean, Frank, you keep referring to Columbus. Is there something that you think we could look into in terms of?
It's big. It's off the top of my head, it's Columbus City Code. I think it's chapter 45 or 47. One of those two deals exactly with the vacant code, and properties of this nature. And that's why I know that, they use the word vacant in their own definition of what a vacant property is. Vacated, I think is the word they probably throw in there. But yeah, I mean, it is hard. It is a weird, like Amy's saying, you get in this whole, what are you getting yourself into? But I don't think there's any other way to do it off the top of my head.
Right.
Well, if we leave it at vacant, at a minimum, then you have to delete number 5, because then you just said vacant for 30 days and meet one of the conditions, and 5 is vacant for 30 days. So.
Right. That was actually the other redundant one. I was trying to remember what it was. That was it.
So that needs reconciled somehow there.
Got it.
And any other comments, questions?
Otherwise, I think the bottom part, where it gives a more definition, I think is nice. That'll help streamline.
What do you think, Gary? You deal with codes a lot.
I've been pretty quiet on this because while I deal a lot with other parts of the code, I have literally no experience dealing in these areas. And so, the legal experience that Amy brings and your experience and Sean being on the board of zoning appeals. I mean, we have never in the 4 years or so I've been on the Architectural Review Board, we have not had one case or issue brought to us that was a maintenance or abandonment issue. So I really defer to others who have experience. I'm impressed with the effort that's gone forward, and it's clear you've been listening. And I also noticed the way the lawyers responded to the request for more enforcement. I thought the memo that was in our packet was, you didn't touch on that, but it's clear you're responding to that request about enforcement issues. So I'm sorry, but I don't have any constructive criticisms to make of what's been proposed.
And Gary, you're exactly correct. I apologize. I didn't touch on the enforcement piece. Just to give the board some background, after we'd met in our June meeting, we met with our legal team as well as our enforcement team and talked about how we currently, the city of Dublin, currently administer our enforcement process, and it's through an administrative order, which is not uncommon. And it does dissect how the process will take place in terms of a complainant will make a complaint, we will investigate, we will notify said complainant, and we'll go through those measures. It's not as exact as we'll take 7 days to investigate, we'll take 14 days to solidify the problem. Our legal team, and again, our enforcement team, based on the broad base of complaints that they get, they didn't want to get that stronghold basically into a process that didn't, you're going from a weed violation to a hoarding situation. So you can't necessarily treat those types of violations in the same manner. So both were very adamant that we keep the enforcement process as an administrative process. And quite frankly, when it went to the Planning and Zoning Commission, they concurred. So I'm sorry, I should have touched on that.
No problem. Tammy, there's one thing I didn't notice in there. I can't remember where it was because I did read through it earlier. It talked about either going through Franklin County Environmental Court or the Mayor's Court.
Mhm.
And I actually would prefer that it would go to the Franklin County Environmental Court, just
Yeah.
because the judge there can actually issue arrest warrants, and we have used them in the past. And Mayor's Courts just frankly aren't as transparent as the municipal courts are downtown with the environmental courts. So they just carry more weight. They're more transparent. The records are there, so on and so forth. So personally, I would lean away from the Mayor's Court and just go towards the Franklin County Environmental Court. And those judges are really good too.
I mean, just if you gave me 5 minutes of my own opinion, I had previously worked for Franklin County, and we did do injunctive relief from the environmental courts. And that's helpful in the sense that if there's a violator that keeps coming before you time and time again, you're no longer dealing with them in terms of a fine process, but they're actually violating a court order. So yeah, that is very helpful.
Yeah,
well, the city does use the environmental court now.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I've worked with 2 different cases on the east side of the river where the legal has gotten orders from the court. Something like this code would make that order even better though, because those orders are pretty general and say you can abate the nuisance, but we didn't have a code that said what all those nuisance things were. So now this would have been great because it specifies the fence and the other things, all they were able to do was tear down the building, but now there's a bunch of other problems, but they didn't have the authority to fix it. So that, in that sense, the list that's here is really good.
And it helps the code officer too build their case for when they have to go in front of that court.
Yeah.
It says right here, plain 1, 2, 3, 4. This is why we're here. But anyway, so wherever that was about the Mayor's Court versus environmental court, I would definitely want to stay to the environmental court aspect of that. There just seems to be more weight behind it.
Thank you.
Tammy, did you get enough input?
I did, yes. So I will just politely explain how this moves forward. We'll take a secondary review of the code and redraft based on all the comments that we've acquired. And I know that it'll go back to the Planning and Zoning Commission as a recommending body to City Council. But we'll, of course, keep this entity involved in how that proceeds and how it impacts, obviously, the historic district. So yeah, we'll proceed with a secondary draft, and we'll keep you abreast of what's going on.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jenny, are there any communications?
No, I don't have any additional communications or anything at this point, unless anybody else has any questions or comments.
All right. I
Okay.
think we should adjourn our meeting.
Great.